Welcome, good evening. Welcome to the second annual DC South Asian Literary Festival. This is closing night events, and we're happy to have you all on board. We've had this literary festival running from April 16th to today, the 24th, our closing evening. And today I'd like to introduce Mr. Faridoon Shahryar, who's joining us from India, and he will be the moderator this evening for the discussion of Mr. Surinder Deol's new book on Faiz. So Mr. Shahryar, please welcome and take it away.
Thank you so much, and good morning from India. All right, it's a huge honor to welcome Mr. Surinder Deol. He's a, I think, literary giant, and his book on Faiz is something that I think it's a literary treasure. It's called From Passionate Love to a Cosmic Vision. An amazing book. Mr. Deol, can you please join me?
And it's the end of the day for us. So let's start with a kind of general overview of Faiz's life and poetry. I'm sure you have been studying Faiz for a long time, even before you came across my book. So I just defer to you, and since you are the moderator, you can start anywhere you like, because there's a lot to talk about Faiz.
All right, so my first question to you will be, what do you think is the... Absolutely. So my first question to you would be, what is the relevance of Faiz and not Faiz today?
Yeah, because Faiz is a multifaceted poet. He wrote for his time, but his work is kind of work for humanity. As you know, the basic thesis of the book is that here was a poet who was not only carrying on a tradition which was coming from Mir and Ghalib, and he enriched that tradition, but he was also creating something very new, a new kind of metaphoric language. Of course, that was a time of pre-independence, struggle for independence. So in a way, his poetry can be situated in that particular time period. But when we read Faiz today, we find that Faiz is really relevant even today, because he talks about human rights, he talks about women's rights, he talks about peace, he talks about amicable solutions to problems. So all the problems which we are facing in the world today, if we read Faiz, we find there is something we can get from him, some reference, some knowledge, some wisdom we can draw from his work.
All right, so I think Faiz is a highly celebrated poet, a highly well-followed poet as well. People know about him in many ways. But I would like to point out something in your book that makes it truly unique. Say, for example, the personal elements of Faiz, the way you have discovered. I think they are novel. Maybe they have not been talked about that much before. So maybe I'd like to touch upon those to start with. First aspect, if you'd like to talk about maybe Faiz's father. You know, it's so ironic that how he came into existence. Like, his father had a rather colorful life, and he suddenly realized that he's not having a son. He marries once again just to have a son, and then Faiz happens. So would you like to talk about that?
Sure, I think that's a very good start, because as you mentioned, his father, his name was Sultan Muhammad Khan. He is such an unusual character that when you read his life, actually Faiz used the term that my father was from the 19th century fiction, because he looks like a fictional character. Just think about this particular situation. This boy, his father, was born in a village, a very, very poor family. The family was so poor that they could not send their son to the local primary school. His job was to get up in the morning, take the animals of the Zimidar and take them for grazing. But he was so interested in learning. So he would take the animals in one place and let them do their job. And then he will go to the primary school, stand behind the wall because he was not a student. So teacher would not allow him to come in. So he would stand by the wall and listen to what teacher was talking. So he learned Alaf Bepe and he learned some math and he saw some interest. But then he showed his keenness, and there were some local sponsors who said, okay, this boy is really very bright. He should be given a chance. So he got a scholarship to do his matriculation exam. So he passed that. Then he came to Lahore. And in Lahore, he actually learned to speak English very fluently. And one day, lo and behold, some diplomat from Afghanistan comes. He says, this is a young boy who speaks English very fluently. So he said, I want to take you to Afghanistan and you become an interpreter for our Sultan there, Amir of Afghanistan. So he went to Afghanistan and there he spent some time. He became actually quite effective in his performance. So, and also he came to know a woman there, a British doctor, Dr. Lillian Hamilton. It is not clear what was the relationship between the two, but at one stage he had to come back to his village near Sialkot, but then he didn't stay there for long. He goes back to England and he does his undergraduation there. He goes to Cambridge University for a law degree. And he is in Cambridge at the same time when Dr. Muhammad Iqbal was also there. So he came to know Iqbal very well. Of course, they came from the same city. He may have known even before. So then he comes back to his village and he marries because he wanted his son. And then he got 4 sons. And I think Faiz was the second one. His elder brother was Tufail. So this is a very amazing story because you can't have, a person coming from such a humble background with no support from the family, with no resources at his command, and he achieved so much in his life. So that was really, as you pointed out, an interesting phase. Now, Faiz was a person who never used to talk about his life. Even he was very reserved about it. But there was one occasion in March of 1984, about 8 months before he died, when in a seminar in Islamabad, he was asked this question to talk about his father. And that's where he talked about his father.
Interesting. Now, he married Alice, and I think that is being documented quite a lot in terms of that. What are the circumstances? She was visiting India. She could not go back to London because the war broke out. Now, what is something that is maybe not that much discussed in public domain, other facts that have been showcased in your book? For example, the nikah of Faiz with Alice was solemnized by Sheikh Abdullah. It was based on a contract made by Iqbal, and the contract said that you cannot marry another woman till the time you're married to this girl, and that in terms of you have to take care of her and the works. So, which is in a way progressive as well. Do you find that interesting?
Yeah, it's amazing. We were talking about his father, but his own love affair with Alice, who became his wife, is an amazing story. And let me back up a little bit. When Faiz went to Government College as a student, Government College Lahore, and as you already may know, that Government College Lahore, one of the most prestigious educational institutions in before the partition. So the admission itself was very difficult there. So because his father knew Iqbal, so he requested Iqbal, give me a letter recommending my son for admission into Government College. So Iqbal wrote a letter. So his father took the letter to the principal, and the principal said, okay, I'll admit your boy. But then he said, can you please return this letter because I want to keep it because it's a signed letter by Iqbal. The principal refused to give back the letter. But anyway, Iqbal became a student. Now in that college, he came to know professors who were actually not only highly academically qualified, but they were very gifted people. People like Sufi Tabassum, who was a poet, Fitras Bukhari, and also M.D. Tasir. Now, M.D. Tasir was a professor of English, and he was the first Indian to get PhD degree from Cambridge University. So when he came back to India, he not only brought a degree, he also brought a British woman as his wife, and her name was Christabel. Now, after Government College Lahore, Tasir became principal of MO College in Amritsar. And when Faiz finished his studies, he got a lecturer job in Amritsar. So Faiz also moved from Lahore to Amritsar. Now, Alice comes because Christabel was going to deliver the child. So Alice came only to take care of her sister. But it was a period of 1938-39. And when she was in Amritsar, the war started and she couldn't go back to England. And she was living alone with her sister and the brother-in-law. And here was a young lecturer who used to come to their place, and they started going for walks into the garden in the evening. That's where the love affair started. And then you talked about the nikah. Tasir actually left Mayo College in Amritsar and he went to another college in Srinagar. And the marriage was to be performed at his residence. So Faiz went there, and nikah ceremony was performed by Sheikh Abdullah, who was leader, even well-known leader even at that time. And the contract itself was the same contract which Iqbal had drafted for Tasir Christabel wedding. And as you mentioned, it had 3 conditions. One condition was that as long as Faiz is married to Alice, he will not have another wife. Second was Alice will have the right to work. She can choose any profession and her income will belong to her. And also she has the right to divorce him anytime she wants. So at the nikah ceremony, after the nikah ceremony, Faiz's mother gave a new name to Alice, which was Kulsum. So sometime, people, it's not a generally known thing, but sometime Faiz used it. I think in one of the books, he dedicated the books to Kulsum. And people didn't know who Kulsum is. That was another name for Alice.
Right. Okay, and so as you've showcased in the book, that Faiz Ahmad Faiz was a man of extraordinary, I think, patience. Mm-hmm. And tenacity, and the fact that he could smile in the most difficult circumstances in life. And if you would like to maybe talk about the phase when he was in jail, for example, mm-hmm. and in fact 2 of his books they've come in between, and they're having those references. Mm-hmm. Where did that element of I would say that patience, sabr, where did that came from as far as Faiz Ahmad Faiz is concerned?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about that particular period, we have to take note of few things that happened in his personal life. They were great tragedies, and those tragedies in fact shaped his outlook towards life. And forgive me for going back a little bit, when we were talking about his father, as a child he knew that his father was a lawyer and he was a very prosperous man. But what happened was, when his sister was getting married, the same day, his father had a heart attack and he died. So you can see, sister's marriage and then the father is dead the same day. And that was a very tragic event. But the discovery which they made was that their prosperity was not real. His father was actually mortgaging his lands and raising funds and spending them. And he had a debt of more than 80,000 rupees, which was a very big amount during those days. So that was a very big tragedy. And then Faiz, during his life, he had the responsibility of not only supporting himself, but also supporting the family. Of course, his elder brother, Tufail, also did the same thing. But both of them had that responsibility to support the younger brother. One of the brothers had an illness which needed full-time care. So that was a very sad thing also. So when he was in jail, now the whole thing is going into jail. It's a kind of, I would say bad luck, because it was a regime that didn't care much about poets and his talent, and he was sent to jail, and he spent quite a bit of time in jail, and then nobody is taking care of the family except his elder brother Tufail. So one day, Tufail was supposed to come to jail to visit him, but I think the same day or the next day he got the news that Tufail died out of heart attack. So first father is dead, then the elder brother who was supporting the family, then father is in prison. So that was a very big shock to him. And here I would like to read the poem which Faiz wrote after his brother's death. Because when we read Faiz poetry, we read some of his popular poems, but this particular poem, which is called Noha, which is like a elegy, is ignored. But it's a short, beautiful poem. I will read both in Urdu as well as in English. मुझको शिकवा है मेरे भाई कि तुम जाते हुए. So it is for his brother Tufail who died. मुझको शिकवा है मेरे भाई कि तुम जाते हुए ले गए साथ मेरी उम्र गुज़श्ता की किताब. इसमें तो मेरी बहुत कीमती तस्वीरें थीं. इसमें बचपन था मेरा और मेरा अहद शबाब. इसके बदले मुझे तुम दे गए जाते जाते अपने गम का ये दमकता हुआ खूब रंग गुलाब. क्या करूं भाई ये एजाज में क्यों कर पहनूं. मुझसे ले लो मेरी सब चाक कमीजों का हिसाब. आखिरी बार है लो मान लो एक ये भी सवाल. आज तक तुमसे मैं लौटा नहीं मायूस जवाब. आके ले जाओ तुम अपना ये दमकता हुआ फूल. मुझको लौटा दो मेरी उम्र गुज़श्ता की किताब. तो जब इस नज़म को हम पढ़ते हैं तो this image of life as a book is not something new, because many times people use this metaphor, life as a book. But the thing which he brings out in this poem is that our book of life is composed not only of who we are, but it also contains the stories of other people who played important role in our lives. It may be our family members, it may be those people of whom we loved, our parents and all that. So when the brother dies, a part of that book, those pages are torn, those pages are taken away, and nobody gives a gift while dying. And here the metaphor which he's using, apne gham ka ye damakta hua khoon rang gulab. But you see, look at the powerful metaphor he's using, that you have given me a gift, you have given me a gulab. पर उस गुलाब का जो रंग है वो खून जैसा रंग है. वो दमकता है, शाइनिंग है, पर उसका जो रंग है वो खून का रंग है. So since a lot of people may not understand Urdu that well, it's a short poem. Let me read in English too.
Sure.
I have a complaint, my brother, that while going away, you carried with you the book of my past life. That book contained many precious snapshots. It contained my childhood and the time of my youth. As a replacement, you gave me, while going, a shining, blood-colored rose of grief. What should I do with it, brother? How should I wear this robe of honor? You can take account of all my torn shirts. This is the last time. Please answer this question. You have never disappointed me by not giving me an answer. Come, take away your shining gift of a rose and give back to me the book of my past life. So it's a short poem, but you can feel the pain which the poet is experiencing. And you know, one quality of Faiz was he never wrote anything directly. He had a wonderful way of talking about people and about events in a expressed language, in an indirect language. So this poem is about relationship. It's about loss. It's about being in a very helpless situation. So as you said, that at least two of his books were composed while he was still in prison. And there are some poems which are very remarkable, and we may not have time to go into all those. But this particular short poem really stands out for me, because when I read it, I feel like crying, because this is so touching. It's written with almost one's grief is coming out, pouring out, and it's on the pages of the book.
Right. So, as you mentioned, his father passed away due to a heart attack. His brother passed away due to heart attack. Faiz himself had a heart attack in 1962.
Yeah.
And he survived that. And he wrote a beautiful poem, Heart Attack, after that.
Yeah. He wrote.
Do you think that
he wrote a poem. I can go to that. Actually, he wrote two poems. One is called Heart Attack, but there's actually he had two heart attacks. One was that was sometime in the 60s. Another one was close to, I think, 82 or 83. So when he appeared for the Mushaira in BBC, that was the last time he appeared in the public. And that Mushaira was presided over by Professor Gopi Chand Narang. तो उसमें उन्होंने हार्ट अटैक के बारे में ही ये पोएम लिखी थी, इस वक्त तो यूं लगता है. So if you allow, I will try to read this.
Sure.
इस वक्त तो यूं लगता है अब कुछ भी नहीं है. इस वक्त तो यूं लगता है अब कुछ भी नहीं है. महताब न सूरज न अंधेरा न सवेरा. आंखों के दरीचों पे किसी हुस्न की चिलमन और दिल की पनाहों में किसी दर्द का डेरा. मुमकिन है कोई वहम था, मुमकिन है सुना हो. गलियों की किसी चाप का एक आखिरी फेरा. शाखों में ख्यालों के घने पेड़ की शायद अब आके करेगा ना कोई ख्वाब बसेरा. एक बैर ना एक मेहर ना एक रब्त न रिश्ता. तेरा कोई अपना न पराया कोई मेरा. माना कि ये सुनसान घड़ी सख्त घड़ी है, लेकिन मेरे दिल ये तो फकत एक ही घड़ी है. हिम्मत करो जीने की तो एक उम्र पड़ी है. I want to highlight one point here. There is a lot of reference to dard in his poetry. So dard ka shajar, dard ke pavan, there are a lot of time he uses the word dard. So one can say, it is kind of reflecting the kind of hard times he had in life. So he was kind of obsessed with that particular idea. But there is another angle in Faiz, which is, and he makes it clear in some of the poems later in his life, dard means pain and suffering in one's life. It is it is a negative force. That means if you are suffering pain and it's not a happy state of affair. It's very, very bad. It's it's very discouraging. But he made a point that sometimes pain and suffering can also be a motivating force. In the sense, it can also have a positive effect. For example, during the freedom struggle, if you look at ordinary people who were going into the processions, who were going into the prisons, they were feeling suffering and pain because it was very hard struggle. But if they gave up that suffering, okay, I'm not going to do this because let somebody else do it, then we would never be free, because then you give up what you are doing. So because the British colonial system was inflicting the pain of people, so it was also strengthening the resolve. So it works both ways. It is a negative force, but it is also a motivation for us to do something differently. और ये जो पॉइंट मैंने अभी पढ़ी है, इसकी जो आखिरी लाइन जो थी, लेकिन मेरे दिल ये तो फकत एक ही घड़ी है, हिम्मत करो जीने को तो एक उम्र पड़ी है. So although I'm recovering from my heart attack, which is the second one, but I'm not giving up. I'm going to struggle. I'm going to do something about it.
Right. And so Surinder ji, before we move to the poetic aspects of Faiz Ahmad Faiz, there's one, I think, connecting sort of question that I had. So he was born in Sialkot. He lived in, say, Amritsar, for example. He served in the Indian Army. Now, and obviously, he was in Pakistan once the partition happened, and he wrote that famous poem, Subha Azadi. How do you look at that element of disorientation That is there in Faiz's poetry and life, because he's basically oscillating between two countries, and he belongs to both.
Yeah. So there is a kind of story here, and also it has to do with his belief system. As you know, he was a Marxist in terms of his ideology. Right. So when you are a Marxist, you care for your religion, but religion doesn't play the same kind of role in your life as compared with that of a believer. So as a Marxist, he had a very firm belief in secular system of government. That means he hoped that whenever the country becomes free, it will be a secular democratic country where all people belonging to all religions, they will live together. So for him, the partition on the basis of religion was something mentally unacceptable. And he never accepted it, never ever accepted it. And he continued to show his displeasure through different means, for which he received a lot of criticism. And I will not only mention this poem, I also mention the poem which he wrote about the 1965 war, which is an amazing poem. And this Subh-e-Azadi, around 15th of August 1947, his family was on vacation in Surinder around that time. And he had also gone there, and he knew that British are leaving and country is going to be divided. And he started work on this poem somewhere around there too. But at the same time, he was also editor at that time of Pakistan Times, which is a daily newspaper. And he, on the 15th of August, he published an editorial where he talked about his frustration with whatever was going on. So ye jo poem hai, when it was published, it had a lot of critical reaction. Critical reaction both from the right and the left. जो right के लोग थे, वो कहते थे कि what's wrong with you? We wanted Pakistan, we got Pakistan. Why are you not happy about it? You are now a Pakistani. तो जो left के लोग थे, जो सरदार जाफरी और उनके जो साथी थे, they were criticizing him. What's your problem? We got the independence. Now let us celebrate. Because this poem ends with the words, as you know, अभी चिरागे सरे रह को कुछ खबर ही नहीं, अभी गिरानी शब में कमी नहीं आई, न जाते दीदा और दिल की घड़ी नहीं आई, चले चलो कोई मंजिल अभी नहीं आई. Which means whatever we were striving, we have not reached that destination. And people were saying, why are you saying that? I think we reached the destination. We wanted independence, we got it. We wanted division of the country, we got it. But his mental frame was that whatever happened was not acceptable to him as a person. That is why when this poem starts, it starts with this very dark language. Ye daag daag ujala, ye shab gazida seher, wo intazar tha jiska ye wo seher to nahi. Now in Faiz poetry, he uses the word subha and seher quite often, which is dawn or morning. And for him, always dawn or morning was the sign of the time when the country will become independent. Okay, so I wanted this day to come, but the way this day has come is blood-soaked. I don't like it the way it has come. Ye shab gazida seher. ये वो सहर तो नहीं जिसकी आरज़ू लेकर चले थे यार के मिल जाएगी कहीं ना कहीं, फलक के दश्त में तारों की आखिरी मंजिल, कहीं तो होगा शबे सुस्त मौज का साहिल, कहीं तो जाके रुकेगा सफीना ए गमे दिल. So as you read this poem, you feel that whatever was going in his mind, in his heart, he's just pouring out. He doesn't care whether people like it or not. So this is quite a controversial poem. और सरदार जाफरी is on record where he says, ये क्या नज़म लिखी है फैज ने, ऐसी नज़म तो कोई मुस्लिम लीग भी लिख सकता है, कोई RSS का member भी लिख सकता था. But that was misguided criticism because they did not understand the man, because the man had this idea of people living together, religion not being the dividing factor. Okay, and even today I have seen some people criticize Faiz in a very wrong way. Actually, this guy has suffered a lot because of his love for India. He loved India. He had friends in India. So he always wanted, whenever he came to India, that was the best time of his life. He loved it so much. So if today people criticize him for something, I don't know, this is totally unwanted criticism.
Right. So you spoke about Sardar Jafri Saab. Now, one very interesting aspect about Faiz Saab was that supposedly he was like a Taqi person शायर. But at the same time उनको criticize किया जाता था कि आप romantic poems भी लिखते हैं, आपको सिर्फ आपको मजदूरों की आपको दर्द के बारे में लिखना चाहिए और जो oppressed हैं उनके बारे में आपको अपनी शायरी में करना चाहिए. But he was, would you say that in a way he was like a non-conformist? He did and he wrote what he believed in rather than following any sort of groups whatsoever.
नहीं, जैसे हर एक शायर की लाइफ में होता है कि एवोल्यूशन होता है. You don't become a great poet moment you start. So when Faiz went to government college, he was an aspiring poet. And when you are young, what kind of poetry you write? You write love poetry. What kind of poetry you read? You read love poetry. Okay. So he was very much impressed by a poet who was very popular during those days. His name was Akhtar Shirani. So at the same time, when he was a young student at government college, even before that, he had fallen in love with a Afghan girl who used to be his playmate when they were young kids. So he was so much obsessed with her that the girl lived near a place where his sister was, I think in Lailpur. So he used to go to his sister's place, not to meet his sister, but to see that girl. And he was so much obsessed with her that he wrote 2 or 3 poems which come in the beginning part of Naqsh Faryadi. Or usme ek poem hai, Aakhri Khat. You know, you are not caring for me, you are not loving me. So this is my last letter. You know, I'm going to die, and then you are one day going to come to my grave, and you know, all kind of, you know, this is the kind of stuff which all young people do, because this is when you are 20-year-old, you fall in love and you write that kind of poetry. And he continued to write that kind of poetry up to say mid-30s. Okay. When Naqsh Faryadi was published, he should have not included some of those poems, but he did. And then he goes to Anim Rashid, who was a scholar, who was a very respected poet, asked him to write a preface. अब वो बहुत परेशान कि मैं preface क्या लिखूं? ये किताब तो बहुत मिक्स किताब है. You know, there in the beginning he has written romantic poetry, which is worth nothing, because all kind of people are writing romantic poetry. And then in the later part, he's writing better poetry. So it's a mixed bag. So he actually called him a poet of decadence. Why a poet of decadence? Because when you write romantic poetry, which has no bearing on reality, which is not connected with the real life issues, so it's a poetry that has no permanent value. So by mid-30s, he had also become familiar with people who were in the progressive writers movement. So he had known Dr. Rashida Jahan, who was a very active member of the progressive group. So his thinking had changed. So when he wrote the poem, which is a very famous poem, "Mujhse pehli si mohabbat meri mehboob na maang," and that is actually comes in the middle of Naqsh Faryadi. And that is a starting point where the tone of his writing completely changed, because he did not leave out what he was doing. You know, some progressive poets did that. They left the romantic part behind and they became totally revolutionary poets. Faiz did not do that. Faiz went through that phase where first part of his poetry was tu aur main, you and me. That was the focus of his first part. But when he went to me, you, and all of us, he did not leave her out. He included her. It is me, it is you, it is all of us, it is all of humanity, because the issues we face, they are common to all of us. So that is why this poem is really very, very appealing. I'm sure a lot of, because it was sung by Noor Jahan, so a lot of people are familiar. But this poem is simple, partly in the beginning, but it also becomes very complex when it goes in the middle, where he gives it a revolutionary touch. But whatever it is, it was the starting point of a totally new kind of poet that emerged out of that. So to answer your question, so if you can just look at this poem, शुरू में तो है मुझसे पहली सी मोहब्बत मेरी महबूब न मांग, मैंने समझा कि तू है तो दरख्शां हयात, तेरा गम है तो गमे दहर का झगड़ा क्या है, तेरी सूरत से आलम में बहारों को सबात, तेरी आंखों के सिवा दुनिया में रखा क्या है. So up to here, the first stanza is all about romance. It is all about you and me. But then you go to the middle part, he just changes it, that it's not only our love, but there are issues, there are people who are suffering, there are people who have suffered for centuries. So it's a new kind of situation for us. So, and he ends, और भी दुख हैं ज़माने में मोहब्बत के सिवा, राहतें और भी हैं वसल की राहत के सिवा, मुझसे पहली सी मोहब्बत मेरे महबूब नमा. That means I will continue to love you, but that love is going to be slightly different now, because I have realized that our situation is different. So that was kind of his poetic evolution.
Right. So, Surinderji, you've also mentioned about, now, this is an interesting aspect which many people, I think, they will not be aware of. So Faiz did his thesis on Robert Browning.
Say it again.
Faiz did his thesis on Robert Browning.
Yeah.
And you've also mentioned that how his romantic poetry, in a way, initial romantic poetry was inspired by Robert Browning. Now, that's a very interesting analogy that you've drawn, which many people would not be aware of. Right. So would you like to say something about that, sir?
Yeah, so that was the time when he was actually a student, and he wrote his master's thesis, because at that time you could not get your master's degree without writing a thesis, not only for PhD, but even for MA degree, you have to write a thesis. So he wrote a thesis on Browning. Actually, as a young boy, he used to read a lot of British English literature, which was not only prose, but also poetry. And he was familiar with the Shelley, Keats, Byron, Tennyson, Browning. He was familiar with these poets. So he discovered something new in Browning, that Browning is not only a poet of, say, nature and appreciating other things, but he's also at the very heart, he's also a very romantic poet. So it was one among the many sources of inspiration for him. But I don't tag it as a major influence. The major influence was actually his contact with the colleagues in the Progressive Writers Union. Because when he went to the Lucknow conference, which was the opening conference of this union, he met all of those people who subscribed to Marxist ideology and who thought about progressivism as the next phase after independence. So for him, that was a major influence. And that is what actually, it strengthened him. But at the same time, as I said before, revolutionary poetry is a very tricky thing. As you may be familiar, that revolutionary poetry can become redundant very easily. And a great example is Josh Miliawadi. Josh Miliawadi was a great poet. He was the poet of our freedom struggle. He gave the Nara, Inqilab Zindabad, that he wrote about it, okay? So at the same time, are you reading his revolutionary poetry today? No, it's boring. It has no meaning because it's historical value, but it doesn't touch your heart today because today's issues are very different. Now, Faiz, although he wrote revolutionary poetry, his poetry, because he did not, had a total break with his romantic past, he kept that alive. And then he brought the progressive elements. And then he looked into the future, what our future is going to be. That is why his revolutionary poetry is in a totally different class. And that's why we enjoy reading those poems even today. For example, I heard a lot of interest lately when the agitation was going on in India around the citizenship thing. his short poem, Bowl, you have heard that word. Let me go back to it. And it's a revolutionary poem, very short one. It's only 6 stanzas, 6 verses. बोल के लब आजाद हैं तेरे, बोल ज़बां अब तक तेरी है, तेरा सुतवा जिस्म है तेरा, बोल के जहां अब तक तेरी है, देख के आहन घर की दुकान में, तुंद है शोले सुर्ख है आहन, खुलने लगे हैं कुफलों के दहाने, फैला हर जंजीर का दामन, बोल ये थोड़ा वक्त बहुत है, जिस्म जुबां की मौत से पहले, बोल के सच जिंदा है अब तक, बोल के कुछ कहना कह ले. Now, this is a revolutionary poem. It was written during the struggle for freedom. It was about telling people, you have to speak up. If there is oppression, you have to fight. But you read this poem today, it's very relevant because when you look at what's going on in the world today, people have to speak up. If they don't like few things, they must speak up.
Right. Okay. Now, so one more interesting aspect and novel aspect that I came across in your book. So you basically given like a detailed account of various poems in various collections of Faiz. And one thing that I noted was that usually poets, they tend to have maybe like a bigger number of ghazals, and maybe like a lesser number of nazm. But I think here is a bit of an opposite element as far as Faiz is concerned, that in all his collections, the number of nazms, they tend to outnumber the number of ghazals.
Yeah.
Do you in a way find it fascinating?
Yeah. I think, thanks, Faridoon, you're making a very, very important point. The tradition of Urdu poetry, which Faiz inherited, was dominantly the ghazal genre, ghazal poem. But because he wanted to write about issues of the day, he wanted to bring in the progressive element, the revolutionary element, he could not do that so much in ghazal because ghazal has a lot of limitations. Ghazal has to be written with kafiya, radif, bahr, everything. There are so many conditions you have to meet. So he started writing poems early on. Even when he was writing romantic poetry normally poets would write in the form of ghazal, but he chose the medium of nazm, not ghazal. And another very important thing about his nazm is that his nazms, his poems read like ghazals. Why? Because they are lyrical, there is rhythm, and there is some same beauty which you find in a ghazal. That is why उनकी जो नज़म है वो गाई जा सकती है. नज़म को गाना बहुत मुश्किल होता है. Now, Abda Praveen has sung more than one of his nazms, which is a tremendous thing. So also because he was so committed to bringing in something new, which Urdu readers and Urdu tradition had not seen up to that point, was to build a bridge between this division of nazm and ghazal. Because he became a bridge. Why? Because sometime he wrote ghazals also, which were actually poems. So if you read his poem Dhaka Se Wapsi, he called it a ghazal. But ghazal is not like that. Ghazal is, each sher is actually independent of the other. It has nothing to do with but it's a musalsal kind of a regular ghazal, which reads like a poem. So his contribution to this art of fusing the ghazal element into his nazm poetry, I think was a very, very important factor in making Faiz so appealing to the readers, of young readers of today, because that's an amazing contribution he had. Because right. Sorry, go ahead, please.
Please carry it on.
No, I was about to say that when you start your life as a poet, you can only do two things. One is either you carry on the tradition which you inherited, or you bring in something new. So in case of Faiz, he tried to do the number one, which was, he was impressed by some poets like Amir Manai, Dag Dalvi, Akhtar Shirani, Hasrat Mohani. So he brought their contributions into his early poetry. But then he changed course. He brought something which was absent, which was not there in Urdu poetry. And that's why he created totally a new style, a new kind of sensitivity you find, sensuousness you find in his words, his use of metaphors and similes is so amazing. And he did not create a new language like Ghalib, but he almost did that by using very innovative metaphors. That was the great quality he saw in Ghalib.
Right. Now, Gopi Chand Narang Sahib has written the foreword for the book. And I think one very important term that he often uses is tagazzul. And basically the beautifulness in terms of lyricism and the way the language is used. You just mentioned that there were certain progressive poets who contributed a lot at the time of partition, but somehow they're not that maybe relevant or spoken about now, because maybe the poetry is not that exciting, or maybe as you mentioned, boring in a way. Do you feel that element of tagazzul that Faiz had, that has been one of the major factors in his survival as a poet, and the fact that his awareness about him is growing now like never before? And as Narang Sahib also says that the subject is very important, but at the same time that artistry of your words is equally important, and that is something that I think Faiz mastered.
No, I think you bring out a very important point there, and we have talked about this, that he not only brought a new way of writing poetry, he kept the old tradition. The old tradition of Urdu poetry is the ghazal, is lyricism, is rhythm. That when poet writes something, he writes not only for himself, he writes basically for the audience and a singer, potential singer, somebody, a singer who can take up that nazam or ghazal and sing it one day. So I don't know he did it consciously, but because he was such a gifted poet, it came to him in a very natural way. I don't get the feeling of artificiality anywhere. He's not trying to make up things or show off in a way sometimes poets do. So these things, whatever is the subject, it came in a very natural way. And he had that, I use the word expressed, he expressed the meaning. The meanings are not obvious. The meanings are underneath the words which he has used. But as a reader, you have to struggle to either get his meaning or you can attach your own meaning. For example, I read the poem about Noha. Now, it's not only a poem about Faiz's brother who died. It could be anybody's brother or sister dying, because it's a shared pain. This is the way he writes. And so he brought in the element of lyricism and he combined with a new metaphoric language. And Narang Sahib talks about that in detail, that his sensuousness, his sensitivity to things like when he talks about dawn, Sahir, Sham, Raat, Andhera, when he uses these words are written in such a way that they have picture quality. So if you are listening to his poem and you close your eyes, you forget the ears what you are hearing. You see the picture before your eyes. There are some poems which are, you can just enjoy them as pictures, not as collection of words. So he had that very fine skill. Very few poets have that, and that's what makes him a very unique poet.
All right, so we spoke about Faiz, the person, briefly. I think to discuss him, I think we need hours, many hours. We can keep talking. So we spoke about Faiz, the person. Now we're talking about Faiz, the poet. The element of courage that he had was I think truly remarkable. Especially the sort of times that he lived in spite of going to the jail and in spite of all sorts of surveillance that was there on him, he still kept on expressing himself the way he wanted to. Like for example, to write हम के ठहरे अजनबी इतनी मदारातों के बाद that he wrote after 1971. Now I think to go against the tide, it must have required a hell lot of courage to do that, because the way the entire India-Pakistan I think dichotomy, I would say, in a way, has been that you have to take sides.
Yeah, you have
to prove your loyalty. You have to take sides. That is when you get that element of acceptability in a way. But he, being from Pakistan and then still expressing his solidarity with his friends in Bangladesh. What sort of a person would do that? Like, do you feel that element of courage that was there in Faiz, it contributed immensely to Faiz the poet?
Yeah, it requires a lot of courage, and it's a question of values. If you have certain values, the question is, are you able to stand up for those values? Now, that may have consequences, because when you do certain things and people in authority, they don't like it, that means either they will not give you what you desire or they will punish you. So he got rightly punished. So either he was in jail. Once he was not in jail, he was not given a ministerial position, or he was chairman of Arts Council, and few things which he liked, he did it. He never got the honor in his life to be in a position, say as Minister of Education. He would have been a great Minister of Education. He would have been a great Minister of Culture. He, in fact, raised the question which no Pakistani has ever raised. He says, what is the foundation of our country? Did it start in 1947? That means whatever happened before 1947, it did not exist. If it exists, what is it? What is our history? So he wanted to set up an international university known as Taxila University. But as it happened in Iran, same thing in Pakistan, because you have religious hierarchy which is in charge of policy making, so his proposal was shot down in no time. Nobody listened to him. So coming to his point regarding courage, there are two examples, very good examples. One is his relationship with India and the poem which he wrote for the 1965 war. I want to mention that. And also he wrote two poems plus the ghazal about Bangladesh. Now in all these poems, something which is very, I would call it strange or something mystical, is that he does not use few words. He does not use the word India. He does not use the word Pakistan. He does not use the word war. He does not use the word genocide. He doesn't use words which can be related to an event, okay? So he expresses his pain in words which is very personal to him. So let me read out this poem, which is about 1965 war, because I'm older than you in age, so I have a memory of what happened in 65. So the memory is there in my mind. So he titles this poem Blackout. Blackout is something that happens when there is a conflict, there's a war going on. So that is the only hint that this is a poem about some war. जब से बेनूर हुई हैं शमे, खाक में ढूंढता फिरता है न जाने किस जा, खो गई है मेरी दोनों आंखें, खो गई हैं मेरी दोनों आंखें, I have lost sight. तुम जो वाकिफ हो तो बताओ कोई पहचान मेरी, इस तरह है कि हर एक रग में उतर आया है मौज दर मौज किसी जहर का कातिल दरिया, जहर का कातिल दरिया. तेरा अरमान तेरी याद लिए जान मेरी, जाने किस मौज में गलता है कहाँ दिल मेरा. एक पल ठहरो कि उस पार किसी दुनिया से बरक आए मेरी जानब यदे बेजा लेकर, और मेरी आंखों के गुमगश्ता गुहर जामे जुल्मत से स्याह मस्त नई आंखों के शब्ताब गुहर लौटा दे. एक पल ठहरो कि दरिया का कहीं पाट लगे, और नया दिल मेरा जहर में दुल के फना होके किसी घाट लगे. फिर पे नजर नए दीदाओ दिल लेके चलूं, हुस्न की मदा करूं शौक का मजमून लिखूं. So I will also like to read this in English because there were some difficult words. As you can see in the poem, where did you get the idea it's about war? It could be about anything. It is his own feelings about he cannot accept the fact that these two countries at war and they are killing each other. This is unacceptable to him as a matter of fact, as a value. So let me read in English so that it becomes clear. Since the glittering rice lost their illumination, I'm trying to find in the dust and not even know the place. I have lost both my eyes. So when you say I have lost both my eyes, is I see my own people. I should see, but I'm not seeing them. I should see my friends across the border, but I'm not able to see them because I have lost both my eyes. If you know me, please tell me who I am. I feel it has descended into every vein, a murderous river filled with poison, tide after tide, yearning for you, my love. I do not know which tide has swallowed my heart. Just wait a while. Something might come from the world beyond. A flash of lightning might come in my direction, bringing it with luminous hands and the lost glow of my eyes. The light of black, new shiny eyes given back to me. Wait and let us find the river's depth and breadth and a new heart of mine, washed with poison, decimated. Let it find a bank of its own. Then I will make new offerings, fresh eyes, and a new heart in praise of beauty, an unending essay on love's intoxication passion. So it is all said in metaphors. It is loss of eyesight. It's about the poison, river of poison. It's about light going out of our lives. So this is Faiz. This is the heart of Faiz poetry. This is how he feels about events. And we don't have enough time to go into the Bangladesh poems, but they are also exactly written the same way, expressed meaning. You draw your own meaning. I'm just giving you what I feel in the depth of my heart. So this poem about 1965 war, people who criticize him in India, they should read this poem. And he got hell for this. You know, he was told, you are a Pakistani traitor. You are not supporting our army. You are not supporting our objectives, whatever we have, national objectives. So he suffered for that. He paid a price for that. But when you are a poet and you stand for certain values, you have to express the way you express it. And that was one of the great qualities of Faiz.
All right. Surinderji, one last question to you. Now, obviously, we have been talking about his Urdu poetry, but he also wrote beautifully in Punjabi. That was, I think, in a way, his mother tongue as well. And we have a huge Punjabi audience all across the world right now, which is extremely dedicated as well. Any thoughts about Faiz's Punjabi poetry?
Yeah, he wrote Punjabi poetry, but in my book, I didn't cover it. But he wrote it as a hobby. That Punjabi poetry is beautiful, very, very charming. But we don't tag it along with this Urdu verse because there are qualitative differences both in the subjects covered and the way he said. So that's more, the Punjabi poetry he wrote was more in the folk tradition. You know, it is like, you know, the great poets of Punjabi literature, Bulle Shah, Waris Shah, and other poets who wrote in that tradition. So his Punjabi poetry follows that tradition, and it's very, very informal. And it's not about any major world issue or even national issue. It's about the things which villagers would normally talk about, enjoy. So I read that poetry, but I didn't include in this book. But it's fascinating for anybody who wants to go deeper into studying Faiz to look at his Punjabi poetry.
Okay, one last question, Surinderji. How did the entire experience of working on this particular book change you as a person? And you know why I'm saying it is because I've been, as I told you, I've been reading this book for the last 3-4 months. I've read it twice or thrice now. And I find it so fascinating the way the sort of hard work that has been put into this. I would like to know, how has it changed you as a person working on Faiz?
One thing is a kind of, this was a great discovery. I was not a great fan of Faiz. As a student, you know, I was so much occupied with Sahir. I was obsessed with Sahir. Nothing else. As I write in my brief note in the book, it was a young Sikh boy at our college function who sang some katha of Faiz, which I didn't know at that time that it was my Faiz, and that was "Raat yun dil mein teri khoyi hui yaad aayi, jaise veerane mein chupke se bahar aa jaye." So that was when I was very young and just coming out of college, and the singer was a young Sikh boy with a turban on, white turban. And later on, that young boy became Jagjit Singh. So my first introduction to Faiz poetry was from Jagjit Singh. And he didn't mention at that time that maybe he even didn't know that it was what he was singing belonged to Faiz. But it was actually Professor Narang's lecture in Rekta. I think it was 2017. And that lecture is still available on YouTube. It is called Faiz Ke Teen Ishq. And I was surprised by the title. Faiz ke do ishq to sune the, ye teesra ishq kahan se aa gaya? So that discovery of his third love actually was a fascinating thing for me, and that prompted me to do the research and write this poem, write this book.
All right, Surinder ji,
So we are
almost
almost out of time. So my thanks to you, Faridoon. It's you got up early morning and such a wonderful discussion. Nice to see you. Hope
nice
we
to see you,
can
sir.
get together again and talk about something else. Thank you.
Absolutely, sir. Would love to. Thank you very much, sir. You have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.